Hey, welcome everybody. It's Brian Lambert. Welcome to the show today on increasing empathy with AI. We're going to have a lively conversation, and we're going to have a real group dialogue here on the concept of, can you increase your own empathy with artificial intelligence, and what does this even have to do with what's going on today? Thanks so much for joining us on all of our social media platforms. Right now we're streaming live on YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, eventually TikTok, but we're also live on Twitter. We're inviting you to chat any social platform. We can see your chat, so please drop a chat into the chat box and we will get back to you. Joining me today, we've got Jen Marie, Craig, and Ken, and you're going to hear from them as we go through this show. We really want this to be interactive, lively, and fun. It is a bit of a deep topic, but we hope to make it relatable. And also, we're going to talk about the technical and business aspects of empathy with AI. In our first start of our segment, we always talk about the news, and believe it or not, empathy with AI is in the news. Did you know that AI, when properly implemented, can detect emotion? Did you know that AI, when implemented correctly, can actually provide what humans consider empathetic responses through voice and through text? And many companies are deploying AI to enhance the user experience by making AI chatbots and voice bots more relatable. Now, I know that there's a balancing act with this in the news and in our own personal lives. I'm sure you've all been in or on a phone call where perhaps the AI operator has gone astray and perhaps you've been extremely frustrated. But I will say, over the last 1 or 2 years, there have been dramatic advances in the concept of AI, and the technology is rapidly advancing with the concept, the underpinnings of large language models and more precise search and retrieval of content to make the bots and these AI operators much better. And we're going to explore that today. So let's talk about the headlines. These are from the last week around the concept of empathy in AI. AI outperforms humans in an empathy test. The University of Toronto study found that ChatGPT can generate consistent empathetic responses for a longer period of time. Did you know that was even possible? Well, it is. It's a reality. Also, AI-generated responses show positive impact. At the University of Southern California, they revealed that AI-generated empathetic messages can boost hope and reduce distress. And this is important for perhaps people in crisis. AI enhances user experiences. Systems are actually being designed with empathetic guardrails and actual prompts that encourage these artificial intelligence bots to be more empathetic and more human-like. Obviously, there's a challenge with that for many people. Do we really want to relate to machines? That will be another show, I promise. We'll talk about the concept of sentience and things like that on future shows. But really what we're focused on here is, can AI actually relate to humans at an emotional level? And more research is coming out, even in the last week. These are just headlines from the last week. MIT launched a deep empathy project to explore how AI fosters empathy and drives human responses to global crises such as the Syrian war. And then AI is an empathetic learning tool, helping people relate to where they are and perhaps where they're struggling with content, topics, and knowledge, and meeting them where they are. And there's some great examples of that I'll share, and I'm sure others on the panel will share as we go throughout the show. So let me pause here. Panelists, anybody have any thoughts on today's headlines?
Yeah, definitely. I read all of them. I was really intrigued by the outperformance in that title. It just really got me. That was the first one I wanted to read. And then I laughed after reading the article because, oh yeah, it'll keep listening. That's amazing, right? When you're in a situation where someone needs a lot of empathy, of course, the machine is going to outperform the human every time, right? Because it doesn't turn off. It's 24/7.
Oh yeah, and this idea of for a person like me, using my example, listening to somebody and empathizing with them for I don't know more than 10 seconds. If you ask my wife, it's perhaps difficult for me. But when you look at that research, how long was it quote unquote listening and empathetic for? I can't remember.
Honestly, I don't remember the amount of time, but the fact that that was the major finding, it made a lot of sense. But when I was reading the headline, I was thinking, well, it was nicer or it gave hugs. I was sort of taking it to a different level in my head versus what it actually talked about.
Which is listening and the ability to relate for longer periods of time. I think it was hours, not minutes,
No,
if
it
I
was
remember.
hours. Yeah, because, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So some people can empathize for seconds, some people for minutes. AI can quote unquote empathize and listen for hours. It never gets tired. It never gets drained.
I
And
need
that's,
that parent AI listener, right?
yeah, that's right.
Say,
Anybody else?
Brian,
Greg or Ken?
I got an example here, Brian, as you guys have been talking. So the example is somebody that used to work with me. His name was Nate. So Nate was the best customer support person we had because he hung in there. He hung in there for 15, 20, 30 minutes, could be an hour, but there's only so many Nates, right? The interesting part about how Nate would start every support call was, don't worry, we're going to address your problem today. He had this ability. And the reason I wanted to, mention Nate is, what if you were to train AI on Nate's approach? But what if you were to have that empathy right at the very get-go? It's the first thing he did. He even say hello. He goes, don't you worry, we're going to address your issue today, because AI doesn't feel. It's pretty much going to do what you trained it to do. It can detect emotion, but it doesn't feel. Nate, on the other hand, he could feel. And he was the first one. And some of us, may not be able to feel for 5 or 10 minutes into the call. Nate got it in the first one. So that's my human example. And I'll come back to it every time. AI doesn't feel, but it can be trained, right, to pick up sentiment.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that concept of, what is empathy? And in many cases, from a human perspective, it's the ability to relate to and perhaps even feel somebody else's pain or challenges. So what we're talking about here in reality is if the AI cannot feel, it can act like it does, perhaps, or it can relate, but technically it doesn't feel, nor does it get tired. Right.
That's one of the things that our large language models are really good at, is detecting patterns, right? And there's not that big of a difference between reading MRI results and figuring out a cancer diagnosis versus looking at voice stress, looking at patterns of speech, looking at keywords, and deducing what that person's mental state might be. It's not like it really has theory of mind, but it's really good at pretending it does. And functionally, isn't that what we want from our interactions? I don't want it to actually feel, but I certainly want it to make me feel good.
Well said. Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
All right, so let's got a quick commercial break and we'll be right back.
For insights,
There has to be a better way.
introducing the AI Lead, your guide to overcoming data drag and accelerating digital dominance. Discover how to eliminate inefficiencies, transform data into a competitive advantage, and achieve digital dominance with actionable AI strategies.
With the AI lead, we're not just keeping up, we're leading the charge.
Industry leaders call it a must-read for future-ready executives. Master change, lead with command. Visit AILeadbook.com and unlock the blueprint to digital success today.
All right, welcome back. So let's talk about what is the opportunity here. The opportunity is the ability to create systems, artificial intelligence systems, that can relate at a human level without actually becoming human and without having those feelings, without getting tired. From execution or deployment of these types of systems, there's a lot of different what would be called use cases for AI. We've already talked about some. We've talked about the idea of using AI to listen, to be more empathetic on customer service calls, the ability to relate to people in crisis, and there's a threat detection piece using tone and understanding tone, inflection, and the words that are said from a threat perspective. So when we think about bringing AI into an organization or into a specific workflow or use case, really we're talking about the blend of what we call at Digital Command, the purple collar work, which is the ability to bring technology and creativity together to solve human problems. To do that, we need to understand this concept, and I think we can somewhat relate to it of emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence has been around for quite a while. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to replicate through technology the ability to have some sort of emotional connection, even though the machine, the computers, the wires, the hardware, the software, the bits and the bytes actually can't feel. And that's really the opportunity here. But to make that work, it has to be designed in, and then it has to be designed in with guardrails so that it doesn't become manipulative. So this idea that is an opportunity that I wanted to frame out for the panel and for you listeners is the idea that we have to be intentional about building systems that can emulate empathy. We have to be intentional about what that means. We have to be intentional on when it goes too far from a security, safety, ethics perspective. And we have to be intentional about the technologies at play to pull this off. You can't just willy-nilly, as my dad used to say, go out and be empathetic today without having that intentionality. So we're going to talk about that opportunity here, and we can talk about it a variety of different ways. We can talk about it from a technology perspective. We can talk about it from a human perspective. And as purple collar focus that we are, we want to talk about it from both the technological and the human perspective to pull this out. So we're going to talk as a panel on this, but it's this idea that can AI become aware of its own biases, because biases affect how empathetic it can show up. Can you teach AI some sort of contextual empathy, so situational empathy, perhaps when somebody's in crisis or in pain or frustrated, the ability to become more relatable and not inflame the situation? And then what is the role of human oversight in all of this? Where do humans get involved? How does that work? And how do we keep humans in the loop as machines? Remember, they're machines, to Craig's point, are still able to engage in what could be considered touchy subjects. So let's talk about that as a panel. Folks, I'm just going to open this up. You're all experts in this area as much as I am, and perhaps even more. So what have you seen? What comes to mind here as we think about these areas around really operationalizing empathy?
I'll jump in. So when you think about the foundational elements that a company needs to tackle, it's funny how maybe this is just an American thing. We start off with technology. We love technology. We can't wait to bring in another piece of technology. But then all of a sudden now, people are saying we don't want to always bring in technology. So I think, Brian, to be intentional, and I saw that part in your book, what comes to mind is people, my Nate example, right? Replicating, what the best are doing. Then it's process. What is it that got your company after 30 years to this point? You make it by 7, you're probably doing some things right. But if you make it by 30, you're certainly doing something right. So it's people, it's process. Then it's content. Now this is where I'm super excited about AI. If there's anything, and maybe it's not coming across, but I'm really excited about AI. And that is all the content we have to develop in the past, we had to do the old-fashioned way, right? Through templates. Right, you got that dummies book, you went to the back, you got that CD, you got that template, and off you went. But you had to do something with that dummies template. Sometimes you didn't even read the book. So more importantly, you need to be able to look at now things as we couldn't do that in the past. Let's say it's sales, you want to do a playbook, and you want to do a playbook for every single industry you sell to every persona you sell to. Who could possibly create all those playbooks? Well, the answer to that is AI. So now you actually have the ability to do things. And oh, by the way, if you want to be empathetic, personalize it. People love stuff about them. And, if it's about making them a hero in their company or on the home front, doesn't matter. So people, process, content, then technology. But you notice there, I've sold a lot of technology, Brian, over the years. I don't lead with technology because our best clients didn't start with technology. So to me, that's the foundation. If you can replicate what the best are doing, if you have processes that have made you different in the marketplace. If you have content that's being generated for you, we'll get into hopefully multimodal AI here in a few minutes. I'm excited about that too, to make this stuff truly come to life. But then you bring in technology. So those are the four elements I think that are super important if you want to be intentional versus winging it.
I sort of add on to that. I think we talk about all of that, but when you think about culture and org change, empathy is really critical. And with technology, if we could shorten the time it takes to get that empathy into the organization so that we can adjust to that change faster, I think that would be amazing. That instead of having all these objections and disrupting meetings and complaining to coworkers, what if, I had something I could talk to, some AI, and say, hey, I'm really mad about this change, but I'm gonna suck it up. I'm gonna make it happen, right? I don't know. I just think it could be fun.
Yeah, I love it. I can see Ken thinking about what he's gonna say. Oh, he's muted.
There we go. Good. That gave me time to think about what I was going to say. Finding the best people, right? And you think about when you're going to train a little intelligent box in order to emulate the kind of behavior, you just have to make sure you have it learn from the best. So when you mention at the end there human oversight, I don't think of these machines as being a replacement for human agency. I think of them as being amplifiers of it. So for instance, the method that we would use to exercise our oversight is kind of having a metacognitive layer. That is what the humans provide, in that we examine transcripts of these interactions or whatever, and we just talk our way through them and say, no, I wouldn't have done it that way. I would have done it this way instead. So human reinforcement learning is the way that we make this good and the way that we keep it from being a replacement.
Yeah, that's a good point. And a lot of training happens when you build your own large language model to get the words right. And a lot of training happened over many years to try to get the ability to relate right. And, that is what became the foundation of generative AI. And I like to draw a line between, before generative AI, so BGAI, and after generative AI, AGAI. We had the technology with machine learning to crunch numbers and figure out what's going on in transcripts. But when you add the generative component over the last few years, the ability to kind of forecast or relate or generate some sort of response based on what's really happening in real time, based on the words that are being used or spoken, or even now the video that's being consumed. You're seeing that with self-driving vehicles. That's a lot of data coming in. So the ability to process all that and then somehow relate is a breakthrough that we're seeing rapidly advance. And the concept here of empathy can be applied in a lot of different ways. Obviously, it's the human to human aspect, but I also like what you're planting the seed for, to me, which is the idea that we can be empathetic as an organization and tuning in with the overall culture of an organization. And, what if we could be more empathetic to customers and how they relate to us, and truly understanding what their issue is as an individual, and then also what are the patterns of that. And then, to get totally crazy, what if you could actually empathize with other cultures or other organizations or even other, economies? Like, what if you understood what was happening globally at both a collective and individual level? Those are aspects of being empathetic. And really, from a business perspective, maybe you call it being in tune with something, but not being tone deaf or self-centered, et cetera. And I think that's the example that I would share is, whatever way, let's just make it personal. In the US, we had our election, big, divert, completely different 50-50, how's this going to go? And the sides are not like closely related. They're very far apart. So, just being non-political for a second, just thinking about the fact that the whole entire country is really split down the middle. So you can get in your bubble and your echo chamber and ruminate in one domain or the other. But what you could have done, and perhaps something you might want to think about, is crack open your ChatGPT or your voice bot powered by AI and ask it, whatever side, why do those people act that way? Or why do those people vote for that insert blank here? Right? So let's try to understand different perspectives. And the great thing about AI is it won't lead with emotion. That actually is a good thing in these highly inflammatory topics. And because it doesn't lead with emotion or, call people out or try to shame them or guilt them into something that they don't want to do, it leads with this thing called logic. And perhaps you might learn something, right? Just thinking about that, right? So this idea of empathy can actually be a great input if we rely on the technology in a way that gives us an input instead of thinking for us, right?
So Brian, can I pick up on your political theme going on here?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I used this the other day. Sales and marketing, of course, they get along just like this, right? Hand in glove, everything's wonderful. So, one's Republican, one's Democrat. And it's funny to be in a room with leaders where the sales and marketing group just get each other, because some of the ideas, these big ideas you have, go further faster. They don't see silos within their organizations. They don't see, what marketing does versus what sales does. So it's been interesting to watch over the years in working with marketing and sales. There's a huge divide there still today, no matter what technology you throw at it. And then what you used to say was the independents were like the support organization. We don't even know who they are. And in some countries, there's about 18 of them. So you wonder, how do we in this case become more intentional and more aligned with the client? Well, you got to align your company to the client, right? And you've been talking about this now for a while, being customer centric, Brian. What a great way of starting off AI. What if AI didn't see the silos, marketing, sales, and support? They just saw the client. They saw their challenges. They saw their upsides. And I'll sort of follow on and finish with this example. When I first saw AI note taking, and I thought that's interesting. I don't want to do notes, but it was the sentiment section that really was intriguing. And then the analysis, when you take a look at the last 10 meetings with a client, the analysis it'll do. You just never get to that. I mean, you could get to that if you had, heard of people that worked with you, but there is things that it's doing to pick up the sentiment. The multimodal, I'm super excited about, because even on this call today at the end, it would do notes, sentiments between the four of us, and it would pick up, the way in which our behavior was in the call. So imagine the wealth of information that we're going to get as a byproduct. No one's going to have to write this up. It's going to be coming in our direction.
I love that. I think that would be so great for even just self-improvement as well at work, right? Because when you are taking notes, you might have your own biases, the way you're taking the notes. What your purpose or your intention is in the meeting can be biased as well. And that's going to influence something a human might do. And I think it's interesting to think of having someone else take those notes and really pick up on all the dynamics going in the room, because that way I don't have to worry about my own dynamic, right? Now I can actually truly be the note taker with this tool and not worry about my self-interest or my role in the meeting. I think I would love that. That would be wonderful to have in my toolkit.
And that is a reality. What Craig is talking about really can happen. Like it does happen today. And, there are, Ken, maybe you can weigh in on it quickly. Like what's the tech underneath that to make those, what are the top 3 things that even make that even possible? I mean, a lot of people don't understand how this actually works. It's a big, black box.
Well, I can give you just a quick example from my personal life, and not to go too deep into it and hijack this, but empathy is kind of what civilization was built on, and really should remain our North Star as much as possible when we design systems. But we do family meetings in our house. We're a big-ish family, at least for me. I was an only child, so it's a big-ish family. And we get together once a week to talk about what we're doing in school, what we're doing, at work, and we go through what's happening over the next week. We get our commitments, we go through our chores, we dole out allowances. And the great thing is that we do all this into a transcript. So we actually have a meeting transcript of our family meetings. And that way, afterwards, I can give each of them a printed out guide that's completely objective And even if we were arguing during the meeting, like Jack says, no, I get this and this and this, we can always go back and get the receipts from the last meeting. So let's bring this into the corporate world. It's building accountability among teams.
I love that.
And what's the underlying tech there, right? You have to record it, transcribe it, feed it into something.
Well, you don't even need to record it. Most of your phones will have an accessibility feature. I know on Android it's called Live Transcribe, and it's buried in the options there, but it's for people who are hard of hearing or, like me, hard of listening. But you turn that on and it transcribes anything spoken in the area. So I just plunk the phone down on the table during the meeting, and afterwards I long press select all copy, and then I switch to my Chat GPT that's got my custom prompt already loaded in it, and boom, I get an objective analysis of the madness and chaos that is our family meeting.
Yeah, I love that example. That example you could run with, because when you look at companies, you spend a lot of time with each other, and you spend more time sometimes at the corporation, right, than you do with your families. But it is that emotion that comes, and when you see it from different perspectives, a 12-year-old versus 40-something-year-old. I'm being kind to myself here. So when you think about that great divide, how could you possibly bring that together in a 30-minute conversation? AI can. So I love that example, and I think that applies in the workplace as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's
and from
how many of your coworkers are 12-year-olds.
No comment.
Well, did they ever stop being 12 sometimes? That made me know.
Yes. That's right.
Well said.
And I think, let's keep kind of tying back to the light view of the tech around this, because to many people, AI is a bit of a black box. And what I want to try to do on all these shows is say, look, here's some examples, here's some stories. And by the way, this is really happening. And then at a high level, here's how it's happening, right? Because the more we understand how it works, the more comfortable we'll become choosing whether or not to use it or not, right? That might not be for everybody, but now they know how it works. So thank you for that. So let's talk a little bit here about how empathy might be deployed in an organization. I'm going to give us a scenario here. I'm going to think about, and I want you to think about, listeners, the idea that a chatbot can be empathetic. And what would that look like? And how would a chatbot respond to you when you're frustrated? And it could be a voice bot, it could be a chatbot. And then let's talk about what are some of the features you would want. So if you can drop that in the chat, what are some features you would want from an empathetic bot? Would you want it to listen? Would you want it to forecast and think about where you're trying to go? Would it want you to, your definition of empathy is just get me to a human? What type of features would you want from a quote unquote chatbot? Now, obviously, we're talking on this show less about process, like, hey, hit 0 to get to a human, and more about the concept of empathy. And what would it look like if this bot were empathetic and you didn't have to press all the numbers, for example? Wouldn't it be nice to call in and not have to press 1, press 2, press 3, press 4, whatever? Or wouldn't it be nice if the AI could relate to where you are in your struggle and start tackling it with you as a problem solver? Those are the types of features that we're looking for. So drop those in the chat. We'll watch them come in. And I want to give you an example here of an attempt at a chatbot. I'm going to share a video, some audio here, an attempt at a chatbot where you, just by listening to this story, you can tell that the company, a shipping company in this case, in England, they wanted an empathetic chatbot. But let's listen to the story and let's hear what happened, and let's see if it was truly deployed as
Yeah, that's what DPD's chatbot said to a customer after it had even made up a poem about how bad its own company was. Ashley was looking to find his parcel from IKEA that was sent back to the sender but didn't have much luck, so thought he'd see what the chatbot could do.
I was literally just kind of at my wit's end of what to do. And then it very obligingly told me this joke. And I thought, oh, that's weird. I wonder what else you can do. And this amazing poem came forth about a DPD chatbot who wasn't able to do anything. It was quite amazing.
It went along the lines of, there once was a chatbot named DPD who was useless at providing help. DPD was a waste of time and a customer's worst nightmare, finishing with a one day DPD was finally shut down and everyone rejoiced. Not the best poem, but we'll allow it. It appeared to even disregard its own rules and started swearing, and even started dissing its own employer, adding, DPD is the worst delivery firm in the world. I would never recommend them to anyone. Ouch.
Like this personality coming back at me from the phone. I think my girlfriend thought I was mad, but it was just quite amusing, really.
It even finished with this lovely haiku that went, DPD is a useless chatbot that can't help you. Don't bother calling them. Most importantly, did Ashley get his parcel?
I've heard nothing. All I know is that it's been sent back. I think perhaps they might hold it hostage now. I wouldn't blame them. That's totally fine. That's probably on me.
DPD admitted there was a fault in their customer service chatbot and an error occurred after a system update. The AI element was immediately disabled and is currently being updated. Are you getting scared yet?
So, an attempt at empathy, an attempt at empathetic chatbot. Ken, do the diagnosis. What do you think happened there?
Insufficient training, garbage in, garbage out. When they say things like AI has guardrails, I mean, they're really talking about that sort of thing. You have to have someone who can imagine all the horrible things it could do and then explicitly go in there and say in the beginning of that prompt, and don't do this, and don't do that, and don't do the other thing.
Yeah.
I'm going to lean into that 12-year-old thing real quick. I felt like maybe my middle schooler was hacking their system during that whole video. Like, that was what I was thinking, was this sounds like a really disgruntled middle schooler to me.
Yeah, so here we have, intentionality, right? So let's get back to intentionality. I'm going to give the company the benefit of the doubt to say, hey, let's go ahead with this AI thing and let's go ahead and make a chat bot for all of our customers to use so that they get their problems solved. Good focus, good idea. Did they ask, how do we do this with intentionality? How do we make sure it has guardrails? What are all the questions we need? What are the risks here that we need to manage? Where could things go wrong? And if you actually know a little bit about large language models and this ability to chat, that ability to do what it did was because it was customized to the company. If you go to a large language model and start asking that type of stuff, it wouldn't just spit that out. This was an implementation of a chatbot with AI inside of a company that then allowed this to happen. Because if you went, again, try it, go to ChatGPT and try Chat or Claude or any of them, you would not have got that response. So somehow the technical side of things went awry here in the intentionality or the intent to be quote unquote empathetic to customers. So what do you think about that? What are some things that we could do and maybe we would advise to avoid that from happening?
Love your example, Brian. And I think we all can kind of match up against that example. I don't know a vector database if it were to hit me in the face right now. I don't know what a vector database is, but what I do know is that the concept of a data set, the smarter that data set is, that's these LLMs. That's where they've spent hundreds of millions of dollars. And no one company can do that. But when you look at the first level support group that we all talk to after going through that series of prompts, and they pick up the phone and they don't know the prompts for some reason, what we just gave them, they're not using. But we went to the person that does triage. And then within 5 minutes, the triage person doesn't know what they're talking about. Then you go to level 2 support. That's somebody who's an engineer type. And then the engineer, you stump them too because the product doesn't work. Now I got to get product management in the mix. What does that happen over 2 weeks? So you could take that workflow, and I'm a bit of an AI agent geek. I love them. The more I build, now I'm starting to chain them together, Brian. But if you could do what I just said there through AI, would it be great on the very first call to have product management on the line? Because AI is basically, and it can be trained to be, through vector databases and other methods of storing content, it can be that smart on the first call. So I think that's why customer support right now is the low-hanging fruit, because how could you put, right, an army of people on the phone that know all those things?
Yeah.
You still got to build product. You still got to promote product. You can't have those people on the phone supporting the product.
Yeah, I totally agree that customer service area is such a wonderful place to start. That is probably the biggest source of frustration still, I think, industry-wide. I mean, think of every time you have a problem and you pick up the phone. I don't know about you guys, but I dread it. I'm like, how long am I going to be on hold before I actually speak to someone who knows something about my problem? And that is just so important in this world, this digital world that we live in, right? Where it's so easy to do everything else, but why can't I get customer service? We've done such a wonderful job of advancing technology, but I still don't get good customer service most of the time. I do think this is a great place to start.
Yep.
Well, as far as like how you would actually fix this, I mean, if I wanted to go back to that company and say, let's not have this happen again, the biggest advice I could give you is in your actual expert design, right? Experts are basically just long sequences of words, right? Like a large prompt that includes things like what its purpose, its instructions, its persona. And a lot of people skimp on the persona. You can go a long way by defining a complex persona for the agent. They work better that way because if you tell them what their traits and behaviors and skills are, they will behave as though they had those traits and behaviors and skills. And some of those things that we may not need to explicitly say, like, don't let the customer trick you into, putting the company into an actionable position. If you try to do that explicitly, it's hard. But if you do it rather implicitly, like acting in the company's best interest while respecting, the customer, et cetera. But if you have those mission statement-y things inside your agents, they'll tend to reflect the best values of your company.
I mean, I like your persona comment, but I was thinking more on the matching side, like using the data from prior calls to observe what's been happening, where the calls are getting stuck, and how to get faster to the path of solution, right? Because really, ultimately, that's a very human thing that a good call representative can do. They can quickly go, this person said 3 things, and in their head, they've made the connection because they don't need the database because they already know it. And they're like, absolutely, I can solve this problem. However, I'm going to need these 50 things from you first. I'm really sorry about that. And then it gets the 50 things. And I believe that when we over-architect the call center solution, and this is just my point of view here, but I think it's over-architected now. So I'd really like to see us use that machine learning to get rid of some of the architectural barriers to getting to the solution faster.
Yeah, it's a great
I
point.
absolutely agree about the importance of training examples, having good training examples, and that's what those transcripts would be. I actually built an expert once that would take sales calls, throw them through that so that we could analyze the sentiment of the seller, right?
Yeah.
And that's how you would build that persona, is by like, how do we copy the good traits? But with having those calls available as a repository, that trumps everything else.
And whether you start off with customer support or, for that matter, any particular role in your company, my advice to companies right now are just get started, because it's the data that you're going to begin to house and groom. Again, I don't know what a vector database actually is, Brian, but I can tell you this. The more I feed it, and I'm now like 12 months into feeding this one particular agent, the smarter it's becoming. And you can imagine if I had started 2 years ago, where it would be. But I'm going to go back to Andy Grove's point many years ago in his book, where he talked about inflection points. And Andy Grove, CEO Intel. And when I first read the chapter about inflection points, it just kind of dawned on me. Is the inflection point going to be understood based on corporate and our hallway conversations? Maybe not, hit or miss. But go ahead and do 50 sales calls and then ask me, what's happening in the industry. Well, I'm going to give you a kind of a sense for good, bad, and ugly. off the top of my head. Now, what if you could train these LLMs? Then you have your internal workspace actually being trained by that fleet of people. And it's not just salespeople, it's customer-facing people. So sellers could certainly benefit. And I like that example. Ken Gong's been doing that for a while. Support can do it too. But look at support as an opportunity, not just to support them and make them happy, but to sell them more. I mean, who doesn't like it when they're going through a drive-through and they ask if you want, fries or a shake too? So, only when you understand, only when you understand they're ready for the fries and the shake, should you offer that up. Yeah. Some companies offer it up on every call.
Yeah, and these are great points. And so the way to kind of frame this out or think about it is, we talked about garbage in, garbage out earlier. So if you think about the black box that's AI, there's inputs into it and then there's outputs that you get. What we're talking about is the magic that's happening inside. And many people fall into the trap, myself included, when generative AI hit, was, I'm just going to focus on the output side. What I quickly realized, and what we're talking about today, it's the actual inputs that matter more. And that's called prompting. That's called vector databases. That's called, the idea of a data source or hooking into a platform model like a large language model as an input into what you need to do. And when you think about that, you really need the data, you need the information, you need the definition of what good looks like. That's what we're talking about with this idea of an expert prompt. And, when I first started prompting, I thought a prompt was one sentence with a question mark. Like, here's my prompt. What's the meaning of life, right? Well, I got to tell you, there are prompts out there that are, thousands of characters long as a prompt into the black box, the magic of an AI system. So if you start thinking about a prompt that's many pages, many words, 10,000 characters, and start thinking about it as uploading the operating system or giving the directions to this bot, that's what we're talking about in order to help it be more empathetic in its response. It's the input side so that you get an output, which is why I focus so much on overcoming data drag, understanding what we're hooking into, and also what outcome we're trying to achieve. What companies are quickly realizing and why adoption is so slow of AI is they have no idea where the inputs are. They don't have a clear understanding of what good looks like, and they don't know where their data resides to pull it in. So these are extremely low hanging fruit examples that have to do with, let's get your inputs in and let's make sure that we're prompting or we're putting guardrails in the form of a prompt that's long, not short. In some cases, very long from a human standard, but it's not very long when the whole entire internet is inside of a bot or a brain called a large language model. The idea of 10,000 characters would be, whoa, that's a lot to me. It's not. Like, my book is really intense for people because it has over 600 pages. To a AI system, that's nothing. So just let's not put human barriers on the concept of AI here. Let's talk about what it's actually capable of, right? And that's what we're talking about here.
So I like what you're saying a lot here, especially on the data drag side, or when you think about the data. A lot of times these organizations likely already have the data, but they're not using the data to help each other inside of the organization. They're not using the data across each of their business units. And that's really the bigger problem, is trying to break down the silos of the data and bring that data up to a layer that you can make a decision and you can get something done. And I think that's what's the really exciting part for a business, is they can pivot and they can do some things differently, and they can do it quickly if they understand the data they already have.
Yeah. And I call that the speed layer, that layer that you bring it into. There's a lot of ways to architect that. There's a lot of technologies involved, but the concept is to pull in the right stuff, the most valuable stuff, data, information, knowledge, expertise, and build that out as a capability. Because that's what we're talking about. Is we're not talking about ask a question, get an answer. We're talking about here is the ability for these technologies to relate to humans as a capability. And when you think about a capability and architecting a capability, that is and can be done with technology in many cases easier than humans, to be honest with you, right? Because you can see it, it's binary, you can test it, they don't get mad. You can test it for weeks and weeks and they're not going to get prickly about it. They're not going to feel like they're under inspection like a human would, right? So there is ways we can build out these capabilities to help our customers be successful, right? So Ken, what are your thoughts on this from a tech perspective? What advice would you have for CIOs that want to get, like Craig said, get started, start small, think about where we can pilot some things out, and at the same time avoid the horror show of this this cussing, swearing chatbot video, right? Like, what do you do if you're in an executive position?
Well, I first make sure that I have a robust internal pilot testing program for anything that could be customer facing. I'd start internal. Start internally facing. Start with your enablement team, right? Start with the people who are doing internal training so that if something messes up, it's a funny story and not like Business Times article or something like that. So you definitely want to make sure that you are piloting things internally, that you're taking the appropriate steps. You shouldn't be rolling out something to the public, depending on the size of your company. If you're saying like, oh, we can roll this out in 2 weeks or we can roll this out in a month and a half, you're not doing testing. Just do lots of testing, do lots of retraining, have smart people review the logs who actually know the business very well so that they can provide their commentary and feedback too. Use transcripts for feedback sessions. You can create a really nice loop between your testing team, the people who need to accept the product, and the AI itself. And the AI can implement those changes very, very quickly, obviously with human agency. But what I'm saying is start with something that you can run in your own playground and in your own backyard. Don't open it up to the public at first.
Yeah, I love it. Craig, what are your thoughts?
So one of the companies that I'm working with right now is the HVAC construction company in Massachusetts. HVAC construction. So this is not a Fortune 100, not picking on them. They don't want to be. But when I went to them and I started talking about this concept, this is somebody who's kind of coming into a leadership role after 35 years. His response was, God, there's a tremendous amount of back office things I could use this for today that doesn't see the light of day. In other words, customers aren't going to be seeing it. So Ken, to your point, it's exactly true. There are operational things this thing can solve right now. There's a liquor store in town here in Twin Cities, and they've been doing it for 50 years. Operationally, there are things you can automate. Get started and get a sense for what it is this thing can do. And in my example I've been using as of late is I look at the LLMs and AI is sort of this garage band that's been around for about 20 years. The last 10, it's been pretty intense, but the last 2, they finally had a couple of hits. And what are the hits? Chat GPT. Suddenly now we're able to use it. Anybody can sit down, even a construction company, load up all their agreements. And by the way, they've got agreements for every job they do. Load up all their specs. They got a whole raft of specs. I have a new understanding now, Brian, of what it takes to put heavyweight, air conditioner in place in a company that I never had before. We wouldn't sell to a company like that in the past because, they didn't have heavyweight marketing and sales. But what's been fascinating about that particular client is they're teaching me that these models, which now are exposed, so to speak, right? They got a couple of hits. It's for any company of any size. Get started, use it internally before you use it external. The customer success, I think it's a great example because it's smarter than anybody, any one person. I don't care how long they've been doing CS, but I think the internal ones, they may not be glamorous. You won't be talking about them at your board meeting, but that's all right. These companies don't have boards, don't care.
Love it. That's great. Well, I appreciate everybody jumping on the show today. One of the things that I'd love to invite you to is to attend one of our upcoming webinars. We've got several webinars on the basics of AI, how to unlock AI, how to drive impact with AI, how to get started. We tend to do these about once a week. Check out digitalcommand.co/webinars. So I appreciate everybody joining today on the show. We'll see you every Friday at noon Eastern. Invite you to come in, bring your friends, bring your team, and enjoy the show. and let's chat together, right? Let's have this conversation as we figure things out together. On behalf of Craig and Jen Marie and Ken, thanks for tuning in today, and we'll see you next week on The Brian Lambert Show.